Sophie had always enjoyed the calm of her small apartment, the quiet mornings with sunlight spilling through the windows, the gentle hum of the city outside, and the comforting rhythm of her routines, but today something felt different, charged, almost electric, as if the universe was hinting that life was about to shift in ways she couldn't yet understand, and the reason for that shift was Lucas, her nephew, who was coming to stay with her for a few days while his parents were away on a business trip, and though she had seen him a few times before, it had been months, and she wondered how much he had changed, how he had grown from the boy she remembered into a young man. And when the doorbell rang, her heart skipped a beat, both out of surprise and a strange, unacknowledged excitement she didn't fully understand, and as she opened the door, she saw him standing there with a shy smile, taller than she remembered. His hair a little longer, the hint of a new confidence in his posture, yet there was still something familiar in the softness of his gaze, something that tugged at her heart in ways she wasn't prepared for, and she felt an immediate protective instinct mixed with a surprising curiosity about the person he had become. And Lucas stepped inside, carrying a small bag, and the apartment felt smaller with him there, the air thick with unspoken thoughts, and as they moved to the living room, the silence was comfortable but charged, the kind of silence that makes people both aware of each other and cautious, and Sophie tried to start casual conversation, asking about school, his friends, his hobbies, and even his favorite books, and Lucas responded politely, a little reserved at first, but gradually opening up as he remembered the easy connection they used to share. And Sophie noticed the little things, the way he leaned slightly toward her when speaking, the careful attention in his eyes, the subtle hesitations in his voice, all of which made her heart flutter unexpectedly, and she caught herself smiling more than she intended, realizing she enjoyed his presence more than she expected, and she told herself repeatedly that it was natural to care for a family member, yet there was an unspoken intensity in their interactions that made her question her own feelings, a quiet tension that hovered like the soft hum of a stringed instrument in the background, delicate and persistent. And dinner was simple but intimate, the aroma of food filling the room while their conversation grew slightly bolder, touching on memories from years ago, shared jokes, stories that only the two of them remembered, and with each laugh, each glance, Sophie felt an odd mixture of nostalgia, pride, and a stirring she couldn't quite name. And after dinner, as they moved to the couch with mugs of tea, the room felt even warmer, smaller, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen, and Lucas began asking questions about Sophie's work, her dreams, her daily life, questions that were innocent enough but carried a softness and interest that surprised her, making her feel seen in ways she hadn't expected in years, and she realized that she had missed the deep connection with someone who truly paid attention to her, who listened without judgment, who made her feel both comforted and alive. And as the evening deepened, Sophie noticed how the shadows from the lamps danced across Lucas's face, highlighting the subtle curve of his cheek, the sincerity in his expression, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, and she felt a confusing mix of admiration and protectiveness, and she reminded herself repeatedly that he was her nephew, that boundaries existed, but the human heart is not always obedient to reason, and she found herself drawn into the rhythm of the evening, the gentle exchange of words, the shared laughter, the quiet moments of reflection when neither spoke but both felt the presence of the other. And as the night grew darker, Sophie found herself lingering near the kitchen while Lucas washed the dishes, noting how his hands moved with ease, the small gestures that revealed his personality, the slight smile when she commented on something trivial, and there was a magnetic pull in the room, subtle yet undeniable, and Sophie's thoughts wandered into forbidden territories, imagining what it would be like if life were different, if circumstances were less defined by family ties, and she caught herself blushing, embarrassed by her own wandering mind, yet unable to stop the fascination she felt with this young man who had grown into someone so captivating. And Lucas, sensing her attention, met her gaze with a curious intensity, a silent acknowledgement that something unspoken was happening between them, something neither fully understood but both felt, and it was in that moment, standing across from each other in the quiet warmth of the apartment, that Sophie realized this visit would be more than a simple family stay, that these few days could change everything, that emotions long buried or ignored could surface in ways she wasn't ready for. And as they moved to the living room, sitting side by side with the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows around them, Sophie noticed how comfortable it felt to share space with Lucas, how natural the conversation had become, how easily they slipped into a rhythm of mutual understanding and subtle teasing, and it was in that delicate, unspoken exchange that Sophie felt the first real stirrings of an attraction she tried to deny, an emotional closeness that went beyond family, yet remained wrapped in a layer of innocence and tenderness, and as the clock ticked, marking the passage of time that seemed both swift and agonizingly slow, Sophie felt a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement at the unknown, a longing for moments that might never repeat, and she wondered if Lucas felt it too, this subtle connection, this delicate tension that hovered like a soft whisper in the room. And when the night finally drew close and they prepared to sleep, Sophie found herself lying awake, the apartment silent except for the distant hum of the city, her thoughts consumed by Lucas, by his presence, by the strange, new emotion she could neither name nor fully comprehend. And then, a soft knock on her door startled her, a whisper of sound in the stillness, and Lucas's voice trembled slightly as he said, "Can we talk?" And Sophie's heart raced, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and something deeper stirring within her, knowing that this simple visit, meant to be a quiet family stay, had already taken a turn she hadn't expected, a turn that promised emotions, revelations, and challenges she couldn't yet see but already felt in every fiber of her being. And as she moved to open the door, the anticipation, the tension, and the unspoken bond between them hung thick in the air, marking the start of a story that would change both their lives forever, a story of longing, connection, and the fragile dance between love and propriety. And Sophie, heart-pounding, took a deep breath and met Lucas's gaze, realizing in that moment that the days ahead would be filled with emotions she couldn't escape, feelings she couldn't deny, and a connection that, however complicated, would leave an indelible mark on both their hearts. The knock on Sophie's door echoed in the quiet apartment, and her heart jumped as she hesitated for a moment, unsure of what Lucas might say. And when she finally opened the door, there he stood, awkward yet earnest, his hands nervously tucked into the pockets of his jeans, his eyes searching hers for some kind of understanding or permission to speak, and she felt a rush of emotion she hadn't expected, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and that unnameable pull she had felt since his arrival. And he stepped inside hesitantly, closing the door behind him, the soft click resonating like a heartbeat in the stillness of the room, and they moved to the living room, sitting across from each other on the couch with a careful distance, the air heavy with anticipation, and Lucas took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly as he began. I don't know why I feel this, but I just need to say it." And Sophie's stomach twisted, a knot forming as she tried to prepare herself for whatever confession was coming, and he continued, eyes fixed on hers, revealing a vulnerability that made her heart ache and pulse at the same time. "I've missed you more than I realized. You've always been there for me, and lately, I can't stop thinking about you." And Sophie froze for a moment, caught between the shock of his words and the strange warmth spreading through her chest, trying to reconcile the innocence of family with the intensity of the feelings in the room. And she reminded herself repeatedly that he was her nephew, that boundaries existed, yet the honesty in his voice, the longing in his gaze, made it impossible to dismiss the moment as mere familial affection. And she felt her own emotions rising, memories of the evenings they had spent together, the conversations that stretched long into the night, the small gestures of care and attention that had always meant so much. And now, seeing him grown, so open, so vulnerable, Sophie realized that the bond they shared had shifted subtly over time into something more complex, more emotionally charged, and though she wanted to deny it, her heart and mind were betraying her, drawing her into the intensity of the moment. And Lucas's voice softened, almost a whisper, as he added, "I didn't mean for it to be like this, but I can't hide how I feel anymore." And Sophie felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of excitement and fear, knowing that the next words, the next glance could change everything between them, and she found herself leaning slightly forward, her hands clasped together in her lap, struggling to steady her breathing, to maintain some semblance of control, while internally, her mind was a whirlwind of questions, desires, and caution. And they sat in silence for a few moments, both aware of the tension, both aware of the emotions hovering between them, fragile yet powerful. And then Sophie spoke, softly, carefully, trying to navigate the storm of feelings without breaking the fragile connection they had. "Lucas, I don't know what to say." And he nodded, a small, understanding gesture, as if he knew that words were not enough, and that what they were experiencing transcended simple explanations. And he reached out slightly, not touching her, but the closeness of his presence, the warmth of his gaze, made Sophie acutely aware of the pull between them, a magnetic force that was both thrilling and terrifying. And he continued, voice barely above a whisper. "I just needed you to know. I don't expect anything, I couldn't keep it inside." And Sophie's chest tightened, her mind racing, thinking of the boundaries, the societal rules, yet her heart recognized the honesty, the raw emotion, and the human need for connection, and she realized in that moment that this was not simply attraction, but a profound longing for understanding, for closeness, for someone who saw her fully, and Lucas's eyes shimmered slightly with unshed emotion. His hands tightening in his lap, and Sophie found herself reaching out, a hand hovering near his, not yet touching, but the gesture spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings that words could not fully capture, and they spent the next hours talking, the conversation flowing from confessions of loneliness, dreams, fears, and regrets, to small shared memories, moments that had been forgotten but now resurfaced with added weight, and Sophie was struck by how much she had missed being truly seen by someone who cared so deeply, and Lucas revealed parts of himself she hadn't known, his insecurities, his hopes, his moments of doubt, and she felt a tender protectiveness mingled with admiration, a desire to comfort him while also wanting to savor every second of this rare intimacy. And as they laughed at shared memories, the room seemed smaller, warmer, charged with a gentle electricity, and Sophie noticed the little details. The way Lucas's hand brushed the edge of the coffee table, the subtle tilt of his head, the flicker of emotion in his eyes, all of which made her feel both connected and unsettled, and she wondered how a simple visit had become so intense, so profound, a mixture of familial care and something deeper, something emotional that neither could name yet both felt. And outside, the night deepened, the city quiet except for distant sounds, but inside, the apartment was alive with words, feelings, and the delicate dance of human connection. And as the hours passed, Sophie realized that Lucas's presence had awakened something long dormant within her, a longing for connection, for understanding, for a kind of emotional intimacy she hadn't experienced in years, and she felt a pull toward him, careful yet irresistible, an attraction that was complex, layered with the knowledge of family and boundaries, yet undeniable in its intensity, and Lucas, sensing her emotions, mirrored them subtly, leaning forward slightly, meeting her gaze fully, and in those moments, the air between them was thick with possibility, a fragile tension neither could ignore, and the clock seemed irrelevant as they explored each other's thoughts, feelings, and vulnerabilities, sharing truths they hadn't dared to speak to anyone else, and Sophie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a mixture of joy, sadness, and the bittersweet recognition that some connections, no matter how intense, exist in fleeting, precious moments that must be cherished but not violated, and Lucas's voice, soft and trembling, whispered confessions of admiration, care, and longing that mirrored her own hidden thoughts, and Sophie's heart ached with the realization that life had given her this rare, unrepeatable moment, a time to connect with someone so deeply, to feel seen, understood, and desired in a purely emotional sense. And yet, as the night drew on, reality pressed closer, reminding them of boundaries, of the outside world, of the fact that Lucas's parents would return soon, of the societal rules that governed family relationships, and Sophie felt a tightening in her chest, a bittersweet tension that made her wonder how long this delicate intimacy could last, how long they could exist in this shared bubble of vulnerability and emotional honesty. And just when it seemed they had reached the deepest point of their connection, the sound of a phone buzzing broke the spell, a reminder that the outside world intruded even on the most intimate moments, and Sophie glanced at the screen, recognizing the message from Lucas's parents, confirming that their return was earlier than expected, and a pang of panic mixed with longing swept through her, knowing that their hours of closeness might end sooner than either wanted, and she looked at Lucas, his expression a mirror of her own, a blend of worry, desire, and unspoken understanding, and in that quiet, charged moment they realized that this visit, meant to be simple and ordinary, had transformed into something emotionally profound, a mixture of longing, connection, and the bittersweet ache of feelings that could not fully be expressed or acted upon. And Sophie, heart-pounding, whispered softly, almost to herself, "I wish we had more time." And Lucas, voice low and tender, replied, "Me too." And the weight of those words hung between them, a fragile promise of emotions shared, a silent acknowledgement that some bonds, however complicated, are felt deeply and remembered forever. And as they finally moved to their respective rooms for the night, the apartment was filled with a quiet tension, a lingering electricity, a memory of hours spent in vulnerability, honesty, and subtle emotional intimacy, and Sophie lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every glance, every word, every shared laugh, realizing that the connection they had formed in such a short time had shifted something within her, awakening desires, longings, and feelings she hadn't fully understood before, and she wondered if Lucas felt the same, if he too would carry the memory of this night. And as sleep eluded her, she understood that these fleeting hours had changed the course of her emotions, had deepened the bond between them in ways that could not be ignored. And though they were family, though boundaries existed, the raw honesty, the emotional intensity, and the tender moments of understanding had created something rare and unforgettable, a connection that would remain with them long after the visit ended, shaping their thoughts, their hearts, and the quiet ache of longing that comes from knowing someone sees you in ways no one else can. And as the city slept outside, Sophie and Lucas existed in that suspended space, two hearts intertwined in a delicate dance of emotion, a story unfolding in the quiet intimacy of a shared night, aware that the days ahead would be fleeting, yet forever marked by the depth of feeling they had discovered in one. Another morning sunlight streamed through Sophie's window, casting a soft glow over the apartment, and she lay awake, heart still racing from the intensity of the previous night, replaying every word Lucas had said, every glance, every unspoken moment, feeling a mixture of longing, excitement, and the bittersweet ache of knowing that their time together was limited. And when the sound of footsteps in the hallway reached her ears, signaling that Lucas was stirring, her chest tightened with anticipation and a quiet fear, and as he appeared in the living room, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, there was a gentle softness in his expression that made her heart swell, the familiar spark of connection from the night before lingering in the air like a warm, invisible thread between them, and they moved through the morning carefully, sipping coffee, exchanging small smiles, glances, and subtle gestures that spoke louder than words, aware of the invisible tension, the quiet attraction, the emotional intimacy that had deepened overnight. And Sophie marveled at how someone so familiar, so close in blood, could stir feelings in her that were complex, layered, and almost impossible to define, yet undeniably real. And Lucas, sensing the weight of unspoken emotion, reached across the table, just enough for their fingers to brush, and the electricity of that small contact sent a shiver through both of them, a reminder of the intensity of the connection they shared. And as they talked, they laughed softly at memories from their past, from childhood trips, shared jokes, and quiet evenings together, and yet, beneath the laughter, there was a tension, a longing that neither could fully articulate, a desire for closeness that society would not permit but the heart demanded. And when the sound of the doorbell rang, announcing the early return of Lucas's parents, the room seemed to shrink around them, and Sophie's chest tightened as reality pressed in, the fragile bubble of their intimacy threatening to burst. And she saw Lucas's expression mirror her own, a mix of dread, disappointment, and a deep yearning, and they exchanged a final glance across the table, communicating everything they could not say aloud, the weight of emotions, the sweetness of the brief time shared, and the unspoken promise that their bond, however complicated, would endure beyond this fleeting visit. And as Sophie walked with him to the door, her hand lingering for a moment on the small of his back, guiding him gently, she felt the ache of impending separation, the pull of something powerful yet constrained, and Lucas turned to look at her one last time, his eyes glistening with emotion, and he whispered softly, almost a sigh, "I'll never forget this." And Sophie nodded, her own voice catching in her throat, replying, "Neither will I." And the car pulled away, the sound of the engine fading, leaving the apartment suddenly empty, quiet, yet heavy with the memory of what had passed. And Sophie stood at the window, watching it disappear, feeling a strange mixture of sadness, longing, and hope, knowing that this moment, though brief, had left an indelible mark on her heart, a memory of connection, understanding, and emotional closeness that she would carry forward. And as she moved through the apartment, touching familiar objects, hearing the soft echoes of shared laughter, and recalling the subtle gestures that had meant so much, she realized that life had a way of giving fleeting, precious moments that changed us, that shaped our hearts and minds in ways we could not anticipate, and that though the visit was over, the emotions they shared, the vulnerability, the longing, and the tenderness would linger, quietly shaping her days, thoughts, and the way she viewed human connection. And she thought about Lucas, imagining him settling back into his routine, carrying with him the same memories, the same emotional imprint, and a soft smile tugged at her lips as she realized that love, longing, and connection take many forms, not all of them easy, some fleeting, some complicated, yet all valuable, and Sophie spent the day moving slowly, reflecting on the previous night, the intensity of emotion, the delicate balance between affection, desire, and propriety, and she understood that what they shared was unique, a bond that defied easy explanation, one that existed in the subtle glances, quiet words, shared silences, and tender understanding of another human being. And as evening approached, she prepared the apartment for the days ahead, knowing it would feel emptier, quieter, yet carrying within her the memory of Lucas's presence, the emotional intimacy they had discovered, and the bittersweet ache of longing that reminded her how precious connection is. And when she finally sat by the window that night, looking out at the city lights, she felt a gentle ache, the kind that comes from knowing something meaningful has occurred, something rare, something that changes you forever, and she whispered softly into the quiet. Some feelings never fade. They just wait, knowing that the bond they had shared, though constrained by circumstance, would remain a tender memory, a soft ache of longing, a reminder of the power of emotional honesty, connection, and the rare moments when hearts meet in ways that transcend explanation. And in that quiet reflection, Sophie realized that life is made of these small, fleeting, yet profound moments, and that while the visit was brief, it had transformed her, leaving her more aware of the depths of human feeling, the fragility and strength of emotional bonds, and the bittersweet beauty of longing. And as she lay down to sleep, her thoughts returned to Lucas, to the soft intensity of their shared time, to the laughter, the confessions, the tender glances, and she understood that though boundaries existed, love and connection find a way to imprint themselves upon the heart, leaving traces that endure, shaping emotions, memories, and even the way one moves through the world. And Sophie drifted into sleep with a heart full of quiet hope, tender ache, and the knowledge that some connections, rare and precious, remain with us forever, shaping who we are, how we feel, and reminding us of the extraordinary power of human intimacy, understanding, and emotional honesty. A bond that had begun as a simple family visit and had become something unforgettable. A story etched gently into the fabric of her heart. A tale of longing, love, and the delicate dance between propriety and desire. And she knew without doubt that though Lucas was now gone, the memory of this time together would stay with her, guiding her emotions, reminding her of the beauty of closeness, the strength of vulnerability, and the quiet, enduring power of the heart to feel deeply, even in moments that must end. And as the night deepened, Sophie whispered again into the silence, "Some moments change everything." And she knew with a serene ache that this visit, this fleeting but profound encounter, had changed her life in ways she could not yet fully understand but would carry forever. A gentle reminder of the depth, complexity, and beauty of human emotion, connection, and the fragile, wonderful power of love in all its quiet forms.